Hello, I'm Robert Thompson. Welcome to Patty and Robert's ongoing video series about how to work online. Today, I'm going to talk about network fundamentals for digital nomads. So, if you're going to be doing any work in multiple places, this is a presentation that may help. First, let me get rid of my picture. Now, why is networking important for freelancers? Well, freelancers use the network and the internet for just about everything. You find jobs, you research solutions, you deliver products and services. So for just about everything, you need the internet. Um, and understanding the network basics can help you select which services you should be using, make help you keep your work secure, ensure that you look professional, avoiding dropouts and stuff like that, and it can help you diagnose problems. If you know some of the basic terminology, you can talk to support people a little better. So, what is a network? A network is simply the way devices share data and resources. Client devices, that's your computer or your phone or whatever, connects to servers that either provide information or collect information. So you connect to servers all the time. Now, what kinds of networks do we talk about? And we're going to talk about several different types, if you will. But basically, there's a LAN. A LAN is a local area network. So if you have a house router and all your computers connect to that house router, that's a local area network. And you can connect to that network either through a wired connection, physical Ethernet, or through Wi-Fi. A WAN is a wide area network connection that connects multiple LANs together. And in you can either have a private network, a network that's owned by an individual or company, or a public network. Now, if you're a big company, you'll have LANs and WANs that are all private, and then they'll connect to the outside world through the internet, which is a public network. So just some examples, your home network's a private LAN. The internet is a public WAN, and public hotspots provide free internet access on a public LAN. So hopefully that helps you understand just some of the ways we talk about that. Some of the key components, IP addresses. I'm going to go into a little bit of depth in IP addresses because they're sort of the basics of how everything communicates on the network, and it's important to understand. I know sometimes that can make your eyes glass over, so try not to go too deep. But bear with me on that one because I have to go a little bit into that. Internet service provider is simply the company you go to that provides you a connection to the internet. A router is a device that connects networks. Now, in the old days, you'd have a separate router and a switch and a firewall. Most of the time, all of those things are on your router. They're built in on new routers. So, and if your router has Ethernet ports, then it's probably also connecting that LAN component. Um, there's another component we'll talk about in a little more depth, which is the DNS or name lookup. So this is how you convert addresses like www.cnn.com to an actual address. Modem is simply a device that connects to your ISP. And depending on the type of technology that's used, there's different types of modems that are used. And sometimes you don't need a modem at all. An access point simply extends the coverage of your Wi-Fi. So if you have a main router, you might have a separate one that acts as an access point. So now we'll go into the IP addresses. An IP address is simply a 32-bit number, but it's hard to remember 32-bit numbers. So it's written in what they call 4 octets. So the common way to do it is something like 192.168.0.24. That could be your address on a home network because it's a common address. And you'll see in the diagram, it shows how that those 32 bits are divided up into the octets. Each one is translated into a number that we understand. And then there's something called a mask. Now, the network mask specifies how many bits are used for the network portion of the address. And if you're on a large network, like for a company, well, they want to have lots of addresses inside that they can talk to. So they may have an address like 10 dot something, and their network mask would be 255.0.0.0, which would tell the routers and the computers that everything under the first number is part of that same network, and everything else is used for devices. Um, and you don't really need to worry about exactly how it works. Just if you see a mask, that's all it is. It's just telling the computer how big your network is. And most of the devices you'll see will be on a small network, and the mask will be 255, 255, 255.0, or it can be /24. On sometimes they'll use that as a different nomenclature. Um, there is a new set of addressing called IPv6, and that uses 64-bit addresses. And, as you might imagine, when they first invented the internet, no one thought that there would be dozens of devices in every home that each needed an internet address. But now that's what we have. So now we have IPv6, and it's in the process of converting. Eventually, they want to make everything IPv6, but right now, IPv6 is only used on very large networks and on the internet backbone. Someday you may see it in your home, but I don't know. And just if you see an address like the one here, with colons in it, that's an IPv6 address. Another thing to think about with IP addresses is they can be public or they can be private. Public IP addresses are shown to everyone. They're unique across the entire internet. You can only have one. And you can actually see yours if you go through something called whoismyip.com. And that IP address is shared with all the devices on your local network. On your local network, you have private IP addresses, and they'll all start generally with 192.168 dot something. It can be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. But then the last one is your actual computer address. And the router is the one that translates that. Now, I did a demonstration here. I did, what is my IP address? If you type in what is my IP address in um, any browser, it will come up and give you your IP address. And so in this case, it actually detected that I'm on a VPN, and it said this is the VPN address. Okay, there's also another type of nomenclature about addresses, and this is how is the address assigned? There's something called a MAC address, and this is a physical address of your device, and it's what's used inside uh, your local network to find stuff, but that's translated into your actual IP address. So you very seldom need to learn your MAC address, just your IP address. And the IP address can be either dynamic or static. Dynamic IP addresses are assigned by the router for the network, and they can change based on your network, or even if you leave for a while and come back, you could get a different IP address. And that's what we use for all of the PCs, tablets, phones. You can also set up a static IP address. Static IP addresses are generally used for servers and printers. These are things where you don't want the IP address to change. You want it to always stay the same. Um, and so this is either set on the device itself or with a permanent DHCP assignment in the router. Um, and so if you go into DHCP on the router, you see where you can assign them. Um, so those addresses, like I said, they're used for servers, printers. You can have a private or static address for your VPN if you don't want to use a shared VPN address. Um, but most of the time, you'll use dynamic addresses. Now, DNS is a English friendly or a user friendly address for the computer. So DNS is a physical name that's assigned that then is translated into that address. And so you'll connect to a DNS server and sort of hidden in the background, but it'll have a table like this. And I looked up the name, looked up our website, www.rptvirtualservices.com, and that's got an IP address of 50.87.253.14. And I think you'll agree it's a lot easier to remember the name than the number. Um, and here you may also see, like for Google, I looked that up and it had two addresses. It had an IPv4 address for everybody that's still on IPv4, and it had an IPv6 address for servers that are using that addressing scheme. The same is true of CNN.com. Um, so that's all a DNS server does. So here's a simple view. Could be your network, or I called it our network, and you'll have my computer is on our network, and your computer is on our network, and that should actually be mycomputer.ournetwork.com. So devices like phones and laptops all get local addresses on uh, your local network. And as I mentioned before, they're private, so they start with 192.168, and you can't route to those addresses because those addresses are reused in network after network. This is how they originally got around the fact that they were running out of IPv4 addresses, is they each were private. Each of us started building private networks, and the router had to do the translation. So when you're on the internet, your network, or our network as it's written here, has a router, and the router has two addresses. One of the addresses is the one on our network, and it's generally 192.168.0.1. But it also has your public address that's assigned by Mobile. So in my case, signed by the ISP. Um, so the router translates all the traffic coming into that IP address and keeps track of the conversations that you're having. So if you have multiple computers on your local network, they all go through the router and they all share that one public address. Um, and I'm So then it connects to google.com or wherever. One other point about the networking, before I leave this part, is geolocation. When your ISP connects you, your ISP has different ranges. So here we have Mobile, and it's got the 186 range, which is a Class A network. And then it's got different subnetworks that are in different locations. So if it sees an address in Panama, it knows it's in Panama. And actually, it goes a lot deeper than that. Most ISPs will sell your address based on your actual locality. So in the US, it'll show your home address, um, your physical home address and your IP address. And so this is how they can find you if you're on an IP address. And companies use this information um, so that you can get local addressing. Um, you also see on all the cop shows that the police use it to find people based on their IP address. So it's important to understand that if you're native using your native address, not a VPN, they know where they are. A VPN moves your address, and so you can look like you're working in a different location. Um, and so, like, we have a VPN that goes to Florida, and our VPN has a Florida address. Okay, let's just talk a minute about the different types of internet service and some of the advantages and disadvantages. Um, I didn't even list the old phone network connections, but a lot of people have cable connections or at least have had cable connections. And these are classic cable providers, and they found a way to run the internet over cable. And so you can connect to it. In the US, you'll find a lot of good cable connections. Our experience in Panama, at least where we live, is um, when we moved to a more rural location, they didn't change the batteries on the UPSs on the routers that are up on the poles. And so what happens is the power will go out in your locality. And even though you may be on a generator and the cable company's still there, your local connection dropped because there's no longer any power and they didn't have enough battery. Um, so that's one thing to consider with cable in a lot of countries other than the US. Um, Fiber optic connections are much better. Um, First of all, they're a lot faster. They split out data so that if your neighbor is streaming all of the football games, here it would be soccer, on five different TVs and using a lot of bandwidth, on a cable, it can slow you down. On fiber, you don't see that as much, both because of the bandwidth and their ability to split the connections. Um, Another way to get internet connectivity is satellite connection. We used Starlink for a while, and actually, it was pretty good. Our biggest problem with Starlink was that if we had a heavy thunderstorm, it would knock out the satellite connection and we would lose it. But we also had a generator so that we had a backup power for that satellite. Um, 4G and 5G is newer. Now that they're doing 5G, they're putting in more towers that allow you to do much faster connections. So now you see the phone companies actually selling um, modems that they put in your house that connect to 5G and look just like a cable connection. So that's another option depending on where you are. It's newer, so it may not be in all locations. And the other way to connect is public Wi-Fi. And if you're in a a condominium building or something like that, sometimes they will provide you with public Wi-Fi. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Um, just as far as your Wi-Fi, some essentials on that. Um, you can assign a network name. Now, if you're using, a lot of times the cable company will give you a router or the ISP will give you a router, and you can't change the network name. Um, and if they give you a password, then you can use that, but you can't put a VPN on there and you can't set up local addresses. So most people use another router, and there you can assign your own network name. And you want to make sure it's unique. Um, and then you want to make it easy to remember, but have a hard to guess password. Um, I use like phrases like Mary had 8 lambs with dots in between. That's a password that will work on in a router. And if you have something like that, it's hard to decode, but it's also easy to remember. And just especially on older routers, don't use the default unless it's unique. Everybody knows the default passwords for routers, and so if you're people will actually drive around with snoopers in their car and look for networks that do not have a password, and then they can monitor it and use that to access the internet. And once you've established your personal network, only give it to trusted people. If you have people coming in your home that need internet access, you can consider using a guest Wi-Fi band, and this would have a different SSID, and it would have a different password, and you can make it a little simpler. But then you can monitor the traffic that's going on that guest band, and you can also put um, restrictions on bandwidth use and stuff like that. Um, with Wi-Fi, most people have two different types of Wi-Fi, 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz. New routers have 6 gigahertz. Um, with 2.4 gigahertz, um, it's a slower speed, but a bigger distance. So if you go, if you're at your house and you want to use stuff in your yard, 2.4 gigahertz is generally your best choice. Um, if you're connecting to your computer and it's sitting right next to an access point or router, then you should use 5G because that's faster. Now, one thing, many devices like cameras and um, internet devices only support 2.4G, and so you have to use that for them. 6G is newer, it's faster, and I said medium, it's really probably as good as 5G. It's just not widely supported, so you need to consider that. Um, Security fundamentals. Encryption is one thing I sort of alluded to on a couple of times. Encryption makes it harder to read your traffic. If you're on a local network and it's unencrypted, I can see everything that's typed, including your passwords. Um, if you're on Wi-Fi, you should set up a password for encryption. Um, if you're using a VPN, that adds another layer of encryption. And then if you're going into a bank or something like that, most of the time they'll use HTTPS. If it's HTTPS, it's encrypted. If it's HTTP, it's not. Um, so I mentioned VPNs use encryption. Um, you want to consider a VPN anytime you're using a public hotspot for freelancers. It also allows you to establish a home location. Um, Firewalls are something you should think of. Most of the modern OSs have firewall built in. And actually, a lot of the VPNs now have firewalls built in. So you usually don't need a separate firewall. Okay, mobile hotspots and tethering. Um, Public Wi-Fi is great. It's provided in a lot of locations, restaurants and stuff like that. But one thing to remember is if there's no password, there's no encryption. So everything you're typing while you're in that restaurant, everyone can see, and it's easy to snoop. Most restaurants and stuff now have a password, and you just ask the waiter or waitress what the password is, and they'll tell you. And then even if you're using the an encrypted or secure public Wi-Fi, you still want to use a VPN to make sure that you're covered, and it provides another level of encryption. Um, your bandwidth, well, when you're talking about performance, as I said, things like fiber optics are much faster, and what really drives it is bandwidth, speed, and latency. Um, Bandwidth is how much information can be sent at any one particular time. Um, so a lot of times with fiber optics, you can send more information. Speed is how fast the actual networks connect. But then there's something called latency, and this is important if back-to-back connections. So um, if you're having problems with streaming, it may be that you don't have enough bandwidth, and you should check that out. Could also be that your VPN is overloaded and you need to change servers, or it could be your provider is having a problem. We saw this with a recent football game where no matter where we went, the local the provider for our streaming service was having trouble getting the football game out. Um, Latency is more important with two-way communications, particularly if you're doing things like Zoom. Um, and if you're having high latency, then that can slow down the back and forth because it's how much time is each connecting. Um, and what can cause a problem there is if you go through like multiple VPNs, could cause a problem. Um, and so when you generally don't need to worry about that as much at home, but if you're setting up a business network, you definitely do. So just some practical tips. Um, this one I never used to do, but I would now if I was traveling um, every week like I used to. Carry a travel router for flexibility and security. You can pre-configure it with a VPN and firewall, set up your laptop to connect to that travel router. Then when you go to a hotel or something like that, you can connect through that travel router to the hotel and already have a VPN and firewall set up. Um, Another practical tip is using local SIM cards for affordable mobile data. I said that 4G and 5G often provide good service. So you can use your phone as a hotspot. And if you go to another country, um, when I used to have to worry about this, I would go immediately into a location at the airport and buy a local SIM so that I had data and I didn't have to use international roaming for my data. Um, Another thing you can do is download offline maps and documents. Um, and I had this, I worked in Buenos Aires for a while and I didn't have international roaming on my phone. I think it was like $20 a day or something if you wanted it. And so I downloaded offline maps. Now, the problem with offline maps is it doesn't update as you're walking out. And when I was in Buenos Aires, left the hotel, and the map had the hotel on the wrong side of the street, so I went the wrong direction, and it took me about 3 hours to get to work that day. Um, and I got a local SIM card very quickly. Um, and if you're doing work in a new location, test the speed and reliability before you commit to work sessions. Um, so in summary, understanding network basics can help you to make the best decision for freelancing, and there's a lot of other sources for information. But let me know if you like this kind of topic. You can get to me at info@rptvirtualservices.com. Um, and we'll see you in the next video. And if you like the series, like, share, and subscribe. Thank you very much.